For those who don't know me, my name is Norman. My family and I live in Sunnyside. We're part of the community out there in Queens, the midweek group, going strong. We've been having a great time every Wednesday as we get to meet. I'm going to mention every single time to see how many groups will start after. So I'm not one of the pastors here, but I am a person here who has been a pastor before. I currently work at City Seminary of New York, up in Harlem. It's a place where we do a lot of learning by noticing things. We like to sense the city and see what God is already doing around us. I'm always listening and learning from a diversity of voices. So I love being part of the Mosaic community because we have, there aren't a lot of churches where you would just take a moment and look around and it looks like this. Young and old, different backgrounds, different cultures. So I'm grateful that every Sunday when I come here, I continue what I do at the seminary in so many ways that I'm learning from all of you, seeing how we're responding to the call of Jesus in our lives. So grateful to be here. If you've been tracking with us at Mosaic for the last several weeks in this season of Lent, we've been preaching through the lectionary, joining with a wider church that also uses a set of texts throughout the year in the lectionary in this season of Lent. Lent is a season where not only do we sing these songs of repentance, but we do a little extra to examine ourselves in preparation for Good Friday and Easter. It's not just about giving something up, it's really about preparation together. Because in so many ways, at a very practical level, we're not ready for Easter. For many of us, and I hear this almost every year, it's Easter already? It kind of just sneaks up on us. And what Lent is doing as we're singing these songs, as we're coming together, is that it's preparing us as a community together to anticipate that the cross is coming and so is a resurrection, so that we can be ready to celebrate, that we can be ready to celebrate what Jesus has done for us in the resurrection. So every week, the series that we're in Lent is practices to thaw a frozen heart. And these are practices that we're sharing to help us feel so that we're not numb, as New York often makes us numb to what's going on around us. It helps us to be sensitive to the heart of God and to people around us. So just, if you haven't been here, if you're visiting, what we've been doing, we looked at the practice of leaving. We looked at the story of Abraham and giving up what's familiar, going out in faith, and receiving what God has for us. We looked at the practice of singing bold, true songs that call us out of old patterns into new patterns. Last week, Amanda led us through the practice of moving forward despite setbacks in the past, things that might keep us down, keep us from moving forward in faith. Today, we're looking at the practice of engaging grief. And we're looking at one of the most, we only heard a section of it, but one of the most beautiful accounts of Jesus' love in the Gospel of John. For me, if there was a story to thaw a frozen heart, this would be at the top of my list. And there's so much that we can learn from inhabiting this story. So I invite you in this morning, place yourself in that story. See how Jesus looks at Mary and Martha and see how Jesus looks at us. So this morning, as we inhabit this story, I want to first look at Jesus. I want to start there. Sometimes the sermon often has to end there, but I want to start there. I want to look at Jesus, how he cares for those that are hurting. So many of us are probably dealing with grief that might not be obvious to those around us. And this, while the passage is about the death of a person, grief isn't always about physical death. It could be the loss of a friendship, a breakup, a job, news or a diagnosis that changes the trajectory of life, the loss of what could have been. Sometimes it plays out that way. And grief can take so many forms. So let's look to Jesus and see how he cares for Martha and Mary. So after looking at Jesus, I wanted to see how Jesus' example calls us to practice this ourselves, because I don't think we as a society are good at engaging with grief. Not in Western society anyway. So see how this calls us to engage in this practice of engaging grief. And finally, to look at how this story of Jesus encourages us, gives us courage to love in new ways. On a sermon in grief, that was the best I could do to try to make it into an outline. So we're going to look at Jesus. We're going to see how it calls us and how we can get courage from the story of Jesus. So let's look at Jesus and how he cares for those that are hurting. One of the details I love about this story is that it welcomes and acknowledges the complexity of grief. At the seminary, one of my colleagues founded and runs this organization called Here to Honor. And it's an organization that cultivates community around end-of-life learning. She essentially talks about death for a living. So when I got this passage, she sits across from me. So we talked. And she shared with me that people often don't have the patience for the complexity of grief. We tend to distance ourselves from it because it's hard to handle. Or we simplify it in our minds thinking that we can fix it, right? So a lot of times when we see someone going through a hard time, going through pain, and we don't know how to approach, we kind of ask ourselves, gosh, what can I do? What could I say? Maybe it's better to say nothing at all. Usually it is. But then it's also, we pretend that it's not there. And often when we do that, the grieving feel that they're alone. They have to bear it alone, that pain is taboo. And people learn through people's avoidance that it's not something that we can hold together. Other times in our discomfort, we fill that void, that awkwardness, that unknown, with what I call religious foolery. We go to someone in hurting and we say things like, oh, everything happens for a reason. Or God needed another angel. I'm cringing as I'm saying these. Or even we might bring up some verses, for I know the plans I have for you. Or everything works together for the good of those who love God. Don't you love God? Don't you trust him? And for anyone who has ever experienced grief and have been on the receiving end of such foolishness, it doesn't bring comfort. More likely than not, you want to punch them in the mouth than anything else. And all this discomfort, I think, points to our culture's lack of wisdom when it comes to engaging grief. We want it to go away. We wish we can enter into a space and fix it. But if you know in the passage that we just read, both Martha and Mary, they express this powerlessness before it. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. This story shows us Jesus. Notice that in this account, Jesus approaches the sisters and engages with the complexity of grief. He engages each of them in their own way because grief doesn't look the same for everyone. It doesn't follow a timeline. It often shows up at the worst time. And you can't tell it to go away. You can't tell it to wait. It's not predictable, and we all cope with loss differently. Mary and Martha are showing at least two ways that they grieve differently. Martha, as you heard in the story, when she just hears of Jesus, she runs out. She wants to talk. She wants to get to business. She's not waiting for Jesus to walk. She goes out to find him. In the flow of the narrative, as I read between the lines, I can almost hear her protest. What took you so long, Jesus? Where were you? Yet at the same time, I sense that Martha's trying to contain herself. She can't succumb to her feelings like her sister Mary. Someone has to be an adult. Someone has to be responsible. Someone needs to be in charge. So what Martha, as I'm reading the story, I see what Martha is doing is that she's seeking some kind of stability, some kind of certainty. Like, let there be one thing that she can lean on because everything in her life seems to have shifted with the death of her brother. This is how she's dealing. And I know for some of us in my own life, I see myself a bit here. For some of us, it could look like how we deal like Martha would be losing ourselves in work or studies. At least there's like a rhythm to it. You know, it's or we could maybe escape to like the controlled, predictable world of a video game. Or we could go shopping. At least we're calling the shots when we're shopping. We can order, there's some sort of order there. And a lot of times it's because we're not ready to feel. We're keeping things at bay, so we lean on doing. In our story, Martha runs to Jesus and then she theologizes. She wants to perform confident faith. And even though you can tell she's struggling on the inside, almost as if she's trying to convince herself of the things she says that she believes. In the chaos of grief, Martha leans on the things that she thinks she can control. I can figure this out. I can figure out God's will. I could explain this. I know where there's meaning. I'll search the scriptures. Let me reason with the rabbi that's finally showed up. There must be a reason for this. And for some of us, we might see ourselves there. We just need to know. Even if that is bad news, it's better than to float around in uncertainty. So as I'm trying to kind of spell out this way that Martha deals, do you find part of your heart expressed in Martha this morning? Mary, on the other hand, she's overcome. She sits in the house unaware of anyone and anything going around her. In her grief, she's drawn inward. The rest of the world, like the story tells us, is people rummaging about. The rest of the world becomes this dull background hum for her. And I wonder, as I'm inhabiting the story, I wonder what Mary was saying to herself as she was by herself in the house. Maybe you know. Maybe you've also been there. I imagine she must have been thinking, oh, I should have sent for help sooner. Maybe if I helped around the house a little bit more. Maybe if I walked with Lazarus to that appointment. Maybe he wouldn't have gotten sick. If I did this or if I did that. Lazarus, why did you have to go so soon? I was not ready. And there's a whole crowd of mourners. You know, if you look at this, look what's going on. They're all around her, but she pays them no mind. She's swallowed up in her grief. Emotions well up within her. We get a glimpse from the text of what the mourners are expecting. That it seems like she's just going back and forth between the house and the tomb. Over and over and over. That's what the crowd is assuming when she gets up, right? She's stuck. She's on repeat. Even her inner voice, I imagine, is like, how could this be? This is all wrong. This doesn't make sense. How could this be? This is all wrong. This doesn't make sense. How could? And if you've been there before, you know how grief can tie us up in knots and circles. Over and over, repeating the same thing. And as I'm sharing Mary's side, as I'm trying to understand Mary's side, do you see some of your heart reflected in Mary's experience? Because you see, Jesus comes to each of them in the complexity of grief. He doesn't prefer one over the other. Right? There isn't a teaching in this account that says we need to be more like Mary or more like Martha. Jesus doesn't come as a problem solver. He's not here to make us happy. With Martha, he engages in the theological questions. He demonstrates that even in our questions, even in our self-distractions, I might consider that, he's with us. He doesn't guilt us for not being better acquainted with your emotions or shame us that we're not farther along. Come on, you should be over this by now. He doesn't do any of that. He sits there and he patiently dialogues with Martha. He meets her where she is. He meets us where we are. With Mary, he's all presence. His heart moves with hers. The text tells us, like right before that, the text tells us that Mary is in the house and she often went to the tomb to weep there. The text tells us that Jesus gets there. He's greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. his first request when he gets there is to go to the tomb. Where have you laid him? He follows in Mary's footsteps. He goes to the place where Mary has gone round and round and round and probably wants to go again. And it tells us there Jesus wept. There Jesus weeps with her. And just pause there and think that God weeps with us in our grief. The one who, according to John, that this is all in the Gospel of that John says in chapter 1 that this is the one who created everything. That his heart moves with ours. Jesus demonstrates here that even in the overwhelming emotions of our grief, he's present. He sits with us. He follows us in our roundabout patterns. He will not let us think that we're alone. If you're in the midst of grief this morning, and I don't put it past us, I almost expect it. This is the message for you this morning. The rest of this message you could probably ignore, and I'm serious. You probably don't need to. If you're in the midst of grief, you can probably ignore the rest. The message here is that if you're in the middle of it, you're not alone in your sadness. The promise of God is that he will never leave you nor forsake you. Jesus enters into our pain to be with us. The rest of the message, I trust the Spirit will do it in its own time. We'll get there, but know that you are not alone. So Jesus' example, he comes, he's with us. Jesus' example calls us, it challenges us to practice this ourselves. Now, today's message is not going to be an exhaustive how-to. There's no such thing. I'm only going to share maybe how to start. And I'm also recognizing how foolish and dangerous it is to encourage people from a results-driven culture to engage with people who are hurting. So, if anything, I want us to take a deep breath. The last thing I want to do for anyone who's going through hardship is to have everyone talk to you all at once. I don't want to add another burden. And honestly, if I have misspoke or made light of any experiences, I ask for forgiveness, and if you're willing, a gentle correction. I'm growing in this too. This message has been pretty difficult for me to put together for a number of reasons. I'll share more about that in a bit. But one of the first reasons, if we're going to engage in this, one of the reasons why it's really hard and difficult to prepare is because I'm here speaking. If I had any advice to give in engaging with one another's pain, it would be to approach without speaking. To put away any dreams of coming to someone with the right words, or walking away from an engagement, a coffee time with someone like, oh, I did a good job. I'm some kind of emotional hero. Approach without speaking. Don't even enter with any idea that you'd be effective or productive in any way, shape, or form. Enter humbly to listen. No one likes being told anything when they're in pain. Enter humbly to listen with an unrushed attentiveness. Don't plan anything after. Be unrushed. In a city like New York, that's revolution, to be unrushed, unhurried. Remember that you're not there to fix anything, to solve anything, because for those who follow Jesus, who follow in the way of how Jesus is relating, we're there for relationship. We're there for connection. We're there to strengthen bonds that bind people together. Throughout the whole of John's gospel, the main message over and over is about loving one another deeply. John's gospel is the one where Jesus gives a new commandment, right? Love one another out of the love that he has shown us. We model after him. We look to follow his way of relating, of being, trusting that his way, though there are many dangers, pitfalls, trusting that it will bring life. We engage humbly. Will you make mistakes? Yes. Will you try? Well, likely, most of us will probably try to say something anyway, even though I said to enter with silence. And you'll probably crash and burn? Yeah, probably. Will you get embarrassed and discouraged as you try to engage with someone who's hurting? Yes. But I think the encouragement here is, will you keep at it, knowing that even our imperfect engagement is forming you to be like Jesus? That even imperfect and difficult, challenging engagement can bring life. I had mentioned before that this sermon was difficult to prepare for a number of reasons, but I'll be honest with you that for me, the main reason why this passage is difficult is because the very last time I preached from John 11, I was in mourning. I preached from this passage on the very final Sunday at my last church. And as I retrace the verses here, as I was reading along, following the story, I was brought back to that time, to a church I loved deeply. It was a church I helped plant. For over a decade in that community, I taught. I prayed, I ate with, I shared life with them. This was my church family. We celebrated engagements, the birth of children, all kinds of life milestones. A lot of the people in this church I had known since I was in high school. We dreamed together of what our community could be. But certain rules would not allow me to remain there as a pastor and hold certain theological convictions. And I was forced to leave, and I had to let those dreams die. There was a different kind of grief that I was building. A future I had imagined, that I held on to, a church family I loved and prayed for every, I can't imagine a waking hour that I was not thinking about what was going on in the church I was at. It was suddenly taken away. And I was a wreck. I am not an easy person to comfort. Because I thought to myself, like, who would understand? Who would understand? Even probably there's somebody. But as I looked at this passage, it brought me to reflect on that time. And I know that I would not be standing before you today if I did not have friends who pushed through my hard exterior that I projected, if my family had not loved me more than I loved myself at the time. Those around me that cared for me engaged my grief, though I gave them very little encouragement to continue doing so. But they kept going. And they stayed. And though they might not theologize why they kept going, they didn't make into like a paper why they would keep on persisting and caring for me. I think they embodied what is going on in Jesus' life. I think this account in John points us to what gives us courage to persist in the challenging practice of grief, to thaw frozen hearts. So let me interrupt my own story here. I want to see how the story of Jesus gives us courage to love. Earlier, the reading stopped when Jesus got to the tomb. He weeps. And we pick up from verse 38. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. The word of the Lord. When I reflect on my friends who were persistent in their care, on my family who was always present through all of that, persisting in engaging my grief, I see hints of Jesus coming through them. Because through a lot of that season, I did not want to be comforted. I enjoyed being angry at the injustice that I perceived of my situation. I felt hopeless, I despaired, and I stubbornly, I wasn't going to let anyone cheer me up or get any sense that what they were doing was working. You don't get that satisfaction if I feel like this. And in many ways, I was like Martha in the section that I just read. I knew all the right theology to believe. I would confess, as she did earlier, that she knew that Jesus was Messiah. But in that moment of her grief, she resisted. Rolled away the stone. What? When the text mentions 4 days, it was a way of saying, Jesus, it's hopeless. He's dead. Jewish custom at the time thought that a soul might linger around a body for 3 days. There's a chance. But the 4th day that our passage repeats more than once, it means it's done. Martha had already given up, just as I had at the time. But the friends and the people who cared for me would not let me spiral. They would show up. They would gently leave me messages. They would call me. I remember that very first winter, they invited me to join them at what's called a Blue Christmas service. If you don't know what that is, it's a service for those who aren't really feeling Christmas joy. Right? And today, when I read that passage, as I'm coming to this passage fresh, I hear Jesus' question to Martha as if it was directed to me. Norman, did I not tell you if you believed, you would see the glory of God? At the time, my answer to whether I believed, which isn't really a question about intellectual or theological assent, but it's really a question of trust. Norman, did I not tell you if you believed, you would see the glory of God? At the time, do I believe? Do I trust? My answer would have been no. I was stuck. But I'm grateful that my friends and family who cared for me, for them, it was a yes. That last verse, 45, many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him, trusted in him. In my story, my friends and family's patience and gentle pursuit of connection and relationship helped me to believe and to trust again. That Jesus could point to me after I had come back to life through their engagement with me, unbind him and let him go. That was my story, and I see myself there. And for anyone who has heard of the story of the cross, as you read the story, it's pretty clear where their story points. The tomb, the stone, death to life, the many who believed because of it. The central story of the Christian faith is of a God who loved us so deeply that he came to be with us. I think as Kate read earlier, to moved into the neighborhood. Even if that meant experiencing all the pain and heartache that we experience. And though he lived his life to love those around him, he experienced so many forms of grief, rejection, betrayal, systems of injustice that ultimately put him on a cross. But the good news that Christians proclaim, that we will celebrate, not only in like egg hunts and all that fun stuff, but we proclaim from the deepest part of our souls, is that death did not have the last word. Jesus rose from the dead. showing us that when we trust him, when we pattern our lives after his, life prevails. That when he promises that he would never leave us nor forsake us, it's not an empty promise. Even death cannot separate us from his love. That's what the resurrection shows us. When we persist in pursuing one another with love and humility, when we engage with one another's story, not to fix anything, but to show presence, there is life as we follow in Jesus' footsteps. Well, the promise to see the glory of God, we often understand as like salvation. I think sometimes we imagine as like blinding light. I don't know if that's what John meant here. Like, if you believe, you'll have blinding light. Like, I don't think that's what's going on. But I'll take salvation. I'll take heaven for a second. But I believe there's a part of seeing God's glory that we can observe now, that we can experience now, through love that manifests in relationship, in being together in our sadness, in our common human experience. That as surely as we can celebrate the resurrection, we can know that even through the hard things of working and walking with each other, life will prevail. That is surely what we celebrate every week as we come to this table. We come to this table every week to remember that on the night that he was betrayed, Jesus took bread, and after giving thanks, he broke it, and he said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he took the cup, and he said, "This is the new covenant in my blood, shed for the forgiveness of sins. Drink, all of you, in remembrance of me. For as often, and we do this every week, that we eat this bread, we drink this cup, we proclaim the Lord's death until he returns." That the life that we are expecting will surely come as he returns. So this table reflects a number of things. But at the very base, foundational level, it's about relationship. It's about persistent love until he comes again. And there, when we come together at this table, we see his glory, even now. The table meal says all are welcome with him. And as we take, he is welcome with us. So come to the sacred table, not because you must, but because you may. Come to testify, not that you are righteous, but that you sincerely love our Lord Jesus Christ and desire to be his true disciples. Come, not because you are strong, but because you are weak. Not because you have any claim on the grace of God, but because in your frailty and sin, you stand in constant need of God's mercy and help. Come, not to express an opinion, but to seek God's presence and pray for the Spirit. So we're going to come to the table together. I'm going to ask Dan and Amanda to help me. We're just going to come down and take the elements. Cherish that the Lord is with us through all things. Take and eat. This is his body and his blood for us.